I found out I had a stalker the same night someone tried to kill me. The irony is that I'd known I was being watched for weeks. I'd been watching back, building a file, taking photographs, documenting patterns. I thought I was hunting him. I didn't realize he was the only thing keeping me alive. The investigation started with Sarah Mitchell. She was my editor, my mentor, the woman who taught me that journalism wasn't just about telling stories. It was about telling the stories people didn't want told. 3 months before everything changed, Sarah published an exposé on digital privacy violations. 2 weeks later, her life fell apart. Bank accounts frozen, emails leaked, private photos published. Her reputation destroyed in a single night. She called me before she disappeared, told me they weren't just watching anymore. They were weaponizing everything they saw. That was the last time I heard her voice. I knew who did it. Marcus Hale. Tech billionaire, philanthropist, public champion of women's safety online. The irony would be funny if it hadn't killed my friend. Hale ran a company called Safe Haven, security software for vulnerable people. What Safe Haven actually did was collect data on journalists, activists, whistleblowers, and sell that information to anyone willing to pay. Sarah had proof. She published it, they destroyed her. I was going to finish what she started. That's when I noticed him. The man in the gray jacket. Same face in different places. Coffee shop on Monday, subway platform on Wednesday, outside my building on Friday. Most people wouldn't connect those dots. But Sarah had trained me well, and Sarah had been paranoid for good reason. I started documenting him the way he was documenting me. Created a file titled Unknown Asset. Photographed him whenever I could, tracked his patterns, built a profile. I wasn't prey, not yet. I was a predator with a theory. And I was about to test it. I lured him out with a fake leak. Sent an email to a known Safe Haven proxy account claiming I had Sarah's backup files. Knew they'd panic, knew they'd send someone. I chose a public place, coffee shop with cameras and witnesses. Sat where I could see the entrance. He walked in at exactly 3:47. Gray jacket, dark hair, eyes that cataloged every threat in the room before settling on me. He ordered coffee, sat 3 feet away, close enough to hear me breathe. I waited 5 minutes, then spoke loud enough for him to hear. I told him I knew he'd been following me, that I had photos, that denying it would only make things worse. He didn't look up from his coffee, just said quietly that I'd miscounted. It had been 9 weeks, not 8. My stomach dropped. He wasn't denying it. I asked who sent him. He asked if it mattered. I said it mattered to me. When he finally looked at me, his eyes were dark and unreadable. He told me the truth without hesitation. Safe Haven had hired him, contract surveillance. They wanted to know what I knew about Marcus Hale. But the contract had ended 6 weeks ago. I asked why he was still watching. He said he'd realized what they were going to do with the information he'd collected. That's when the car jumped the curb. I didn't see it coming, didn't hear the engine. 1 second, I was sitting across from my stalker. The next, I was on the ground with his body covering mine. Glass shattering above us, people screaming. The car reversed and disappeared before anyone could get a plate number. He stood first, pulled me up, scanned me for injuries with practiced efficiency. Asked if I was hurt. I said I didn't think so. He told me we needed to leave, that what just happened wasn't an accident, that whoever sent it now knew I survived. I followed him out. Had no other choice. We ended up in a parking garage 3 blocks away. His car, black sedan with tinted windows. The kind of vehicle designed to be invisible. I sat in the passenger seat with the door unlocked, making it clear I could leave. He handed me his phone without starting the engine. Told me to look at what was on the screen. It was an email thread. Subject line, Rachel Torres escalation approved. I read through clinical discussions about me like I was a pest control problem. Standard deterrence unsuccessful. Recommend permanent solution. The final email was from Marcus Hale himself. Approved. Make it look accidental. No connection to safe haven. Dated yesterday. I asked how he got this. He explained he still had access to their systems. They didn't know he'd left. I asked why he'd left at all. He said he hadn't signed up to help kill people. I looked at him then, this man who'd been following me for weeks, who just saved my life. Asked if he was feeling guilty now. He said no, he was feeling practical. If they killed me, he'd be complicit. He'd rather not be. The honesty was almost worse than a lie. I asked what he wanted, absolution, forgiveness. He said he wanted me to survive long enough to publish what I was working on. Asked why that mattered to him. He said Sarah Mitchell deserved better, and Marcus Hale had been doing this to people for 5 years. Someone needed to stop him. I was the only one left who could. I wanted to walk away, but I couldn't. The police couldn't help. Running meant dying somewhere else. I needed protection that couldn't be bought or compromised. When I asked what he was proposing, he said one word. Marriage. I laughed, told him he was insane. He said he was strategic. He pulled up documents on his phone, explained how marriage gave legal protections, shared residence, legitimate reason for 24/7 security. Anyone watching would think he was my husband, not my bodyguard. I asked what he got out of it. He said the satisfaction of knowing Marcus Hale didn't win. I studied his face, couldn't find the lie. Told him he was asking me to chain myself to the man who'd helped mark me for death. He agreed, no apology, no justification. Just yes. I should have refused. Should have gone to the FBI, witness protection, somewhere far away. But I thought about Sarah, about the story she died for, about the fact that running meant Hale won. I asked how long. He said until the story published, until Hale was exposed, until I wasn't a target. I asked what happened after. He said then I'd be free. I looked at the email thread again, at the words permanent solution. At this man who'd switched sides for reasons I didn't fully understand. I agreed, but told him we'd do it my way, my rules. He asked what my rules were. No touching, no entering my room without permission, no making decisions for me. He agreed to everything except the last part, said I could keep investigating, keep working. But with supervision. I corrected him, surveillance, not supervision. He admitted he wasn't planning to stop watching me. I said then we were clear. We shook hands on it. 3 days later, I became Mrs. Rachel Dalton. His last name, except I learned later it wasn't really his name either. Just another alias in a life built on false identities. City Hall, no guests, no family, just strangers and a bored clerk. I signed my name on paperwork I barely read. He signed his, whoever he actually was. We were pronounced married. We didn't kiss. Walking out of that building felt surreal. I was married to a man whose first name I knew, Daniel, but whose last name was a lie. A man who'd been stalking me for months. A man I didn't trust, but needed desperately. When I asked what happened next, he said we go home. I asked where home was. He said I'd see. The apartment was downtown, 20th floor corner unit. Floor-to-ceiling windows with city views. It should have been beautiful. Instead, it felt like a fishbowl. Daniel let me enter first. I walked in slowly, taking in the space. Open floor plan, modern furniture, everything clean and minimal. And cameras everywhere. He explained the surveillance covered the living room, kitchen, and hallways. Said the bedroom and bathroom were the only rooms without monitoring. Told me this like it should be reassuring. I said it wasn't. He said I'd have privacy where it mattered. Everywhere else he needed to see what was happening. I asked if he meant he needed to see me. He said yes without hesitation. He explained this would only work if we were honest about what it was. He wasn't my husband, he was my security. And security required surveillance. He handed me a small phone, burner with one number programmed, his. Said to use it if I needed him. I asked if he meant if I needed help. He clarified, if I needed him, even if he was standing right there, even if I could see him. If something felt wrong, call. I asked why. He said he needed to know it was really me, that my voice wasn't being simulated, that someone hadn't compromised my phone or my perception. He said it like paranoia was common sense. Maybe in his world it was. That first night, he showed me the bedroom, my bedroom. Queen bed, minimal furniture, door that locked from inside. Said it was my space. He wouldn't enter without permission. I asked about emergencies. He asked me to define emergency. I listed fire, break-in, someone trying to kill me. He said for fire we'd leave together. Break-ins he'd handle before I knew about them. For someone trying to kill me, he paused. Said that wouldn't happen because he'd see them coming. The certainty in his voice should have been comforting. It was unsettling. I tried cooking that first week. Tried to establish normalcy, some illusion of control. Was chopping vegetables when my hands started shaking. Stress, adrenaline crash, reality catching up. The knife slipped, didn't cut me but came close. Daniel appeared instantly. I hadn't heard him approach. Told me to stop. I said I was fine. He said my hands were shaking, that I'd hurt myself. I insisted I could handle it. He said he knew I could, but I didn't have to. He didn't take the knife, didn't touch me. Just stood close enough that I could feel his presence. Talked me through breathing, 3 seconds in, hold, 3 seconds out. Then instructed me on proper grip, fingers curled, thumb on the spine. Told me now I was in control. Stepped back but stayed in the kitchen, watching, making sure I didn't fall apart. I finished chopping, made mediocre pasta. Sat down to eat alone. He didn't join me, just watched from the kitchen. I asked if he wasn't eating. He said he'd eaten earlier. Asked if he always ate before me. He said yes. I asked why. He explained it was in case something was wrong with the food. Better him than me. I set down my fork, told him that was insane. He said it was practical, that Marcus Hale had resources, money, access. That poison was efficient. Said it like he was discussing weather. I should have been horrified. Should have recognized this as control, wrapped in protection. Instead, I felt safe. For the first time in months. Because this man was thinking about threats I hadn't considered. I hated being grateful for it. 2 weeks into the marriage, I had the nightmare. Dreaming about the car, the one that tried to kill me. Except in the dream, Daniel wasn't there. I was alone, trapped, watching it come. I woke screaming. He was already in my room. Standing by the door, not approaching. I told him to get out, my voice shaking but the command clear. He didn't move. Said my heart rate had spiked 90 seconds ago. My breathing had changed 30 seconds before that. I asked how he knew. He said biometric monitoring. The fitness tracker he'd given me tracked my vitals. I looked at my wrist, at the watch he'd insisted was for safety. Accused him of watching me sleep. He said he'd been monitoring my safety, that there was a difference. I told him to get out. He hesitated, Then said quietly that he'd told me he wouldn't enter without permission, that he'd meant it. But he'd never said he'd let me suffer alone. I told him those two things contradicted each other. He agreed, said he knew. Stayed in the doorway, not crossing the threshold, not leaving. Said if I told him to go, he would. But if I was in distress, he needed to know I was okay first. I wanted to assert my boundaries, my space, my independence. But my hands were still shaking. I was still scared. I told him I was okay. He asked if I really was. I said no, but I would be. He nodded, started to turn away. I called his name. He stopped. Thanked him for coming even though I didn't want him to. He said I was welcome, then left. 3 weeks into the marriage, I found them. Looking for a charger, opened the wrong drawer. Found a file folder labeled with my name. Opened it before I could stop myself. Immediately wished I hadn't. Photos, hundreds of photos. Me leaving work, at coffee shops, walking home. Some recent, some older, some from before I knew I was being watched. And notes, handwritten, meticulous. Subject prefers morning work. Productivity peaks 6 to 9 a.m. Subject exhibits stress response when phone rings after 8 p.m. Subject visits Sarah Mitchell's grave every Thursday. 2 years of documentation. Not just my schedule, my patterns, my moods, my grief. I heard him enter the apartment, keys in the lock, footsteps in the hallway. Stood in the living room holding the file. He saw it immediately, stopped. Didn't apologize, didn't explain, just waited. I said 2 years. He said yes. Said he'd been watching me for 2 years. He confirmed it. I asked when the safe haven contract started. He said 9 weeks ago. I felt something cold settle in my chest. Asked what the first year and 10 months were for. He said his own surveillance. I asked why. He explained that safe haven tracked many journalists. He'd reviewed my work, my history, my connection to Sarah. Said he wanted to make sure I was real. I asked what that meant. He said he wanted to verify my investigation was legitimate, that I wasn't chasing a story for attention, that I actually cared about the people Hale was hurting. Said I was real, so he kept watching. I told him this wasn't protection, it was obsession. He said he knew. Admitted he'd broken into my apartment, documented my life without consent, memorized my routines and grief. I threw the file on the floor, photos scattering. Asked why he was telling me this, why not just lie? He said because I'd asked, and he wouldn't lie about what he was. I asked what he was. He said someone who'd crossed a line long ago and couldn't uncross it. Stepped closer, not touching, just near enough that I could see his face clearly. Said I probably wanted him to apologize, that he couldn't, because watching me had kept me alive. Even before the contract, even before the threat became active. I asked how. He explained someone at Safe Haven had noticed his surveillance before they noticed mine. They'd assumed he was already on assignment. By the time they realized he wasn't official, I was too visible to disappear quietly. Said they'd had to escalate to assassination attempts, and assassination attempts could fail. I said his obsession had saved my life. He corrected me, said his obsession had marked me, but it had also given me a chance. Asked if I wanted him to stop watching. I looked at the photos on the floor, at 2 years of evidence, at the man who'd saved my life because he couldn't stop observing it. Said no. He looked surprised, asked me to repeat that. I said no, don't stop. Because if he stopped now, I was unprotected. Told him just not to pretend this was normal. He said he'd never pretended that. The almost leaving. That night, I packed a bag. Small one, essentials. Change of clothes, laptop, hidden research files. Told myself I was being prepared, having an exit strategy. But I knew the truth. I was leaving. Got to the front door, hand on the handle, and stopped. Realized I had nowhere to go. Every safe house I could think of, Daniel probably knew about. Every friend I could stay with, he'd already vetted for security risks. Every hotel, every shelter, every supposedly secret location, he'd cataloged them all. Not to trap me, but because he'd spent 2 years making sure I couldn't go anywhere he couldn't protect. Stood there for 5 minutes. Bag in hand, freedom inches away. Realized I was already caged. Not by locks, not by force. By the reality that the safest place was right here. With the man who'd been watching me for 2 years. I unpacked. The next morning, Daniel said nothing about it. Nothing about the bag, nothing about my 5 minutes at the door. Just made coffee, set a cup where I always sat. Said quietly that the deadbolt clicks when engaged, that the hallway camera activates when someone approaches, that if I'd opened the door, he would have known. He hadn't stopped me. I asked why not. He said because if I'd actually wanted to leave, I would have. The fact that I was still here meant I'd chosen to stay. Said he needed me to understand something, that this only worked if it was my choice. Not because I was trapped, not because I had nowhere else, but because I'd decided this was where I wanted to be. I asked what happened if I decided differently tomorrow. He said tomorrow I'd leave, just like that. I didn't believe him, but I wanted to. 6 weeks into the marriage, Daniel told me the worst truth. We were reviewing my research, preparing the next phase of the investigation. I mentioned Safe Haven's surveillance patterns, how they'd found me, how they'd marked me. Daniel went very still. Said there was something I needed to know. He admitted the reason Safe Haven had noticed me in the first place was because of him. I didn't understand at first. He explained his surveillance, the 2 years of watching, said he'd been careful, used encrypted systems, covered his tracks. But he hadn't been perfect. Someone at Safe Haven had noticed anomalous data patterns, IP addresses that didn't match known contracts. They traced it back to me, assumed I was being monitored by someone outside their network, which made me either law enforcement bait or significant enough to warrant independent surveillance. Either way, I became interesting, and interesting people at Safe Haven got flagged for priority monitoring. I felt something break inside. Said he was telling me I was safe until he started watching. He said I was invisible, that there was a difference. I pointed out Sarah died because she was visible. He agreed, said I was going to publish eventually. They would have noticed me regardless. I said yes, but not this soon, not like this. He admitted that was probably true. I stood, walked away, needed space. He said quietly that he hadn't kept watching because I was in danger. That I was in danger because he'd kept watching. Said he knew what that meant, what he'd done. I asked if he really understood. Turned back to face him. Said from where I was standing, it looked like he'd created the problem so he could be the solution. Like he'd manufactured a reason to get close to me. He was quiet for a long moment. Said he didn't know, that he'd started watching because it was his job. Kept watching because he couldn't stop. By the time he realized what he'd done, I was already in danger. So he'd done the only thing he could, protected me from the threat he'd helped create. I said that wasn't protection, it was guilt. He agreed, said yes, it was. I wanted to hate him, wanted to rage at him for creating this situation. But I couldn't, because he'd also saved my life, multiple times. And the guilt in his voice was real. I asked why he was telling me this. He said because I deserved to know. Because if we were going to finish this, I needed to understand exactly what I was working with. I asked what I was working with. He said someone who would do whatever it took to keep me alive, but who'd also put me in danger in the first place. Someone who wasn't a hero, just someone trying to fix what he'd broken. After that conversation, something shifted between us. The walls didn't come down, but they became more transparent. I was working at the dining table, laptop open, research spread around me. Daniel stood behind me, close enough that I could feel his breath on my neck. Not touching, just there. I told him he was in my space. He acknowledged it. Said it was distracting. He agreed. Asked if he was going to move. He asked if I wanted him to. I thought about it, finally said no. He stayed. There was another attempt, not a car this time. A package delivered to the apartment. Daniel intercepted it before I saw it. Bomb squad declared it safe hours later, but the adrenaline had already flooded my system. I was shaking in the bedroom when he knocked. Said he needed to check me for injuries. I said I was fine. He said I'd been within proximity of a potential explosive, that he needed to verify. I opened the door, let him in. He checked me methodically. Eyes, ears, hands, looking for signs of concussive damage. His hands were clinical, professional, but they were shaking. I told him he was the one who wasn't fine. He said he was. I pointed out his hands were shaking. He stopped, looked at his hands like he was surprised by them. Said I'd been in danger, that he didn't handle that well. I said he handled everything well, that he was the most controlled person I'd ever met. He said with me, it was different. Pulled his hands back, put distance between us. Said with me he was terrified, all the time. The panic attack came a week later. I was reviewing photos from the bombing attempt, police reports, evidence. Suddenly I couldn't breathe. The walls were closing in. The air was too thick. I was dying, I was sure of it. Daniel was there before I could call. Told me to look at him. I couldn't. He said he needed me to look at him. I forced my eyes to his face. He had me breathe with him, in for 4, hold for 4, out for 4. I tried, failed. He said I could do it, with him. We breathed together, again and again, until the panic receded. When I could breathe normally, I asked him to hold me. He froze, asked me to repeat that. I said I needed to feel safe, asked him to hold me, please. He reminded me he'd said he wouldn't touch me. I said I knew. He said if he started, he wouldn't want to stop. I said I knew. He said this wasn't what we'd agreed to. I told him I was asking him, right now, to hold me. So he did. It happened 3 days later. Kitchen, I was making coffee. He was reviewing security footage. Normal domestic routine, except nothing about this was normal. I turned to hand him a cup. Our fingers touched. Suddenly we were too close, looking at each other. I saw the moment he decided to kiss me. Saw him leaning in. I closed my eyes, felt nothing. Opened them, he'd stopped, inches away. He said he couldn't. I asked why. He said if he kissed me now, while I still needed him, while I was still in danger, while the only reason we were together was survival, I'd never know if it was real. I asked what if I didn't care. He said I would, later, when this was over and I was safe and I looked back. Realized everything between us was built on fear. Said he wouldn't do that to me. I asked what if I wanted him to. He said I didn't, that I just thought I did. Because I was the only person he saw, the only person he trusted. Said that wasn't love, it was Stockholm Syndrome. I wanted to argue, couldn't. Because maybe he was right. Maybe I didn't know the difference anymore. Between safety and love, between gratitude and desire, between needing someone and wanting them. I asked quietly if he'd still want me when this was over. When I was safe. He looked at me for a long moment. Said he'd wanted me for 2 years. That wouldn't change when the danger ended. I asked then why not now? He said because he needed me to be sure, and I couldn't be sure until I didn't need him anymore. He left the kitchen, left me standing there, understanding finally what he was protecting me from. Not the danger, but the possibility I'd confuse survival with love. And never know the difference. 8 weeks after I married Daniel, I published the story. Sarah's evidence combined with my investigation. Leaked documents, testimonies, financial records. Everything proving Marcus Hale wasn't protecting vulnerable people. He was selling them. The story went viral immediately. By the end of the day, Safe Haven's stock had crashed. By the end of the week, Hale was arrested. By the end of the month, the entire operation had collapsed. I was safe, finally, completely. And I had never felt more alone. The apartment felt different after the story published. Quieter, emptier. Even though nothing had physically changed. Daniel was still there, still watching, still protecting. But the reason for his presence had evaporated. No threat anymore. No one hunting me. No one trying to silence me. Just a man and a woman in a marriage that had only ever been a shield. 2 days after Hale's arrest, I found Daniel packing. Asked what he was doing. He said preparing for my exit. I asked what he meant. He gestured to papers on the table, annulment documents, already filed. Said I just needed to sign. I stared at the papers, said he was ending this. He said he was freeing me. Asked if he'd consulted me about this decision. He said I didn't need him anymore. The threat was gone. I could go back to my life. I asked what life? The one where I was alone and being hunted, or the one before where I didn't know someone was watching me constantly. Said I didn't know how to be the person I was before him. He said I'd remember, to give it time. I told him not to make this harder than it already was. Asked harder for who? He said both of us. I walked to the table, picked up the papers, read through them. Noticed a condition, 6 months. The annulment took effect in 6 months, not immediately. I asked why 6 months. He turned away, looked out the window. Said because in 6 months, I'd know. I asked know what. He said whether I wanted him, or just wanted to feel safe. Understanding hit me then. Said he was giving me time to be sure. He confirmed it, said he thought I was recovering, that I'd spent 2 months in survival mode, that I'd learned to trust him because I had no choice. He finally looked at me. Said if he let me stay now, I'd spend my life wondering if I stayed because I loved him or because I was too scared to leave. I said he was making the choice for me. He corrected me, said he was giving me time to make a real choice, not one based on fear. I wanted to argue, wanted to say I already knew. But looking at his face, at the exhaustion, the loneliness, the desperate hope he was trying to hide, I understood. This wasn't about protecting me from danger. It was about protecting both of us from regret. I asked what happened in 6 months. He said if I still wanted him, I should find him. I asked how. He almost smiled, said I was an investigative journalist, I'd figure it out. I didn't ask him to stay that last night. Knew he'd say no, that he'd tell me it would make leaving harder. He'd be right. Instead, I asked if he'd at least sleep in the apartment. Not in his car, or wherever he went when he was giving me privacy. Told him the couch was fine. I wasn't asking for anything else. Just not to leave yet. He said okay quietly, that he could do that. I lay in bed listening to him move around the apartment. Checking locks, reviewing cameras, his nightly ritual of making sure I was safe. Even though there was no threat anymore. Even though he was leaving tomorrow. He couldn't stop protecting me. It was who he was. Around 2 a.m., I heard him settle on the couch. Springs creaking, blankets rustling, then silence. I waited 20 minutes, got up, walked to the living room. He was awake, I could tell by his breathing. He asked without opening his eyes if I couldn't sleep. I said no. He said neither could he. I sat on the floor beside the couch. Asked if I could ask him something. He said anything. Asked what was the worst thing he'd seen in 2 years of watching me. He opened his eyes, looked at me. Said the night Sarah disappeared. That I'd come home and checked my phone 17 times, waiting for a message that never came. That I didn't eat, didn't sleep, just waited. He said he'd wanted to tell me she was gone, to spare me the hope. But he couldn't, because I didn't know he existed. I asked if he would have told me if he could have. He said no. I asked why not. He said because hope was what kept me investigating. Hope was what led me here. If he'd taken that away, I would have stopped. I was quiet for a moment. Thanked him. He asked for what? I said for letting me hope, even when it hurt. I went back to bed. Didn't sleep. Just listened to him breathe in the next room. Knowing tomorrow he'd be gone. Knowing I'd have 6 months to figure out if I loved him or just needed him. Knowing either way, I'd spend those 6 months missing him. 6 months later. I didn't look for him right away. Gave myself time first. Moved to a new apartment, one he hadn't secured, hadn't vetted, hadn't filled with cameras. Started therapy, started rebuilding. Started figuring out who I was when I wasn't being hunted. Took 3 months to feel normal again. To sleep without checking locks. To walk outside without scanning for threats. To exist without the weight of surveillance. I dated someone briefly. A nice man, a normal man. Someone who didn't know how to disappear, who didn't carry weapons, who slept peacefully. It lasted 2 weeks. Because every time he touched me, I compared him to Daniel. Every time he made a decision, I wondered what Daniel would have done differently. Every time I felt safe, I realized it was because I was thinking about the man who'd taught me what safety felt like. I ended it. Month 5, I started looking. Used every investigative skill I had. Tracked his old accounts, his patterns, the places he'd taken me. Found nothing. He'd erased himself completely. But I'd learned from the best. So I looked for what he couldn't erase. Found him through a parking ticket. The car he'd used when he saved me that first time. Tracked it through DMV records, impound logs, resale databases. Finally found it registered to a security company in Seattle. A company so small it barely existed. 1 employee, 1 address. I booked a flight. The address was a small office above a coffee shop. No sign, no business name, just a number. Climbed the stairs, knocked, no answer. Tried the handle, unlocked. Walked in. The office was empty, clean desk, filing cabinets, computer. And cameras. I saw them immediately. He'd been watching the door. Knew I was here. I sat in the chair across from his desk and waited. He arrived 20 minutes later. Walked in like he'd been expecting me. Looked exactly the same. Same dark hair, same careful eyes. Same way of moving like he was cataloging threats. He greeted me by name. I greeted him back. He said it had been 6 months. I agreed, said I'd found him. He said he assumed I had a reason. I looked at this man who'd watched me for 2 years, protected me for 2 months, left me for 6, who'd given me time to be sure. Told him I was sure. He asked about what. I said that I wanted him, not because he made me feel safe, not because I was scared, not because I was dependent, but because I missed him, every day, every moment. Not the protection, not the security, him. He started to object. I cut him off. Said I'd dated someone else. Asked if he knew that. He was quiet. I said of course he knew. He was still watching. Admitted I'd ended it, because he wasn't Daniel. Said I'd gone 3 months without thinking about Marcus Hale, without worrying about threats, without needing protection. And I'd still wanted him. He asked why. I said because he saw me, really saw me. Not the journalist, not the survivor, not the person who needed saving. Just me. And because I saw him too. Not the stalker, not the protector, not the obsessive man who couldn't stop watching. Just him, the person who carried so much weight he couldn't sleep. The person who'd rather be alone than risk hurting someone. The person who thought he didn't deserve to be loved because of what he'd done. He said quietly that he didn't deserve it. I said I knew he thought that nothing I said would convince him otherwise. So I wasn't here to convince him. I was here to tell him what I'd decided. He asked what that was. I said he was right. I'd needed time to be sure, time to understand the difference between needing him and wanting him. Said now I was sure. I wanted him. Not for 6 months, not until the next threat, not conditionally. I moved around the desk. Said the question wasn't whether I was ready, it was whether he was. He stood slowly, looked at me like he was trying to figure out if I was real. Said if he agreed, there was no going back. He wouldn't be able to stop watching, stop protecting, stop being what he was. I said I knew. He said I'd spend my life with someone who was broken, who didn't know how to be normal, who would always be checking exits and scanning for threats. I said I knew. I reached out, took his hand, told him to stop protecting me from himself and let me choose him. He looked at our hands, at the choice I was making. Finally, let himself believe it was real. Said okay quietly. I asked him to repeat that. He said okay, that he chose me too. Pulled me close. For the first time when he held me, it wasn't about protection. It was about love. 1 year later, we didn't get remarried. Didn't need to. The annulment had gone through. The legal marriage was over. But we chose each other anyway. I kept investigating, kept exposing corruption. Daniel kept watching, but differently now. Not surveillance, partnership. He helped with research, security, strategy. We worked together, chose to stay together. Not because I needed protection, but because I wanted him, and he wanted me. Sometimes people ask how we met. I tell them the truth. That he was stalking me. I confronted him. We got married for survival. And then we fell in love. They think I'm joking. I let them. But late at night, when Daniel checks the locks one more time, when he reviews security footage, even though there's no threat, when he watches me work with that same intense focus, I understand. He'll never stop watching, never stop protecting, never stop being the man who spent 2 years learning everything about me. And I'll never stop choosing him anyway. Because some men love you by staying close. And some men love you by making sure you never need them again. Daniel did both. He made me strong enough to survive without him. And then he stayed anyway. Not because I needed him, but because I wanted him. And that's the most honest love story I know.